Crypto Blue Hour. I'm Eric. This is Charlie. Every week we get together and give you an insider's perspective of what's going on in the crypto space. Charlie, how are you doing today?
Hanging. Things are good. Stoked. It's nice and warm here. Did a little midday chore over to Williamsburg, which is like a 30-minute motorcycle ride. So it was nice. So yeah, people are out and about. It's a beautiful day. What about you? How you doing?
Yeah, doing good, man. Things are pretty
Nice.
slow here in Austin. I was telling you earlier, I did a improv comedy show last night, which was fun.
Yeah.
But other than
Wish I could
that,
have been there.
yeah, just working, hanging.
Nice.
But yeah, dude, let's kick this thing off. We got a few
Hell yeah.
interesting topics to talk about today. The first of which is going to be regulation in the crypto industry. There's been a lot
Yeah.
of things happening, and so I'm going to give a brief overview, and then we can go back and forth a bit. But like the breakdown is an article this week came out pretty much saying that there's a new subcommittee in Congress that's scheduled to hold its first hearing on March 9th, which is a week from today. But they're going to
Nice.
weigh recent actions from regulators against crypto companies. So the past few weeks, a few things have happened. The SEC, which is kind of like in the United States, it's the overarching entity that manages cryptocurrencies as a whole, or how they're regulated. It issued against the platform Paxos, which is a company that creates stable coins, which we've talked about, but it's a stable coin is generally pegged to the US dollar. So companies will give Paxos $1 and Paxos will mint them $1 USD. But
Pegged meaning like algorithmically, just to be clear. So like when it says pegged, like it sounds like a weird word. It's just like when I remember first hearing that, I remember being confused, but it's like algorithmically, mathematically, they make it such that 1 equals 1. And that's not that stable coin that Paxos issues, or the stable coins that Paxos issues. I'm not sure how many they issue, but I think that they also are working on a euro. Nonetheless, I'm sorry for interrupting, but it's not algorithmic. There's an algorithmic stable coin, which is a really weird thing. That's a very weird name for something that it's kind of a misrepresentation. And we've seen algorithmic stable coins like UST in May collapsed very famously and depegged, whereas Paxos is it's pegged to the dollar as opposed to being algorithmically pegged. I'm not sure what you would even call that UST thing, but I was talking about it with people who don't work in crypto right before that happened, a couple of weeks, and we were very, 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 very confused by it, and we didn't understand it. But we were talking a lot about it because he works in hedge funds, and they were talking about it at his company, and I visited him. We spoke a lot about it. We were like, it doesn't make any sense to us, and then it collapsed. So and so you got to be very wary of, like, again, reading the docs, knowing what you're talking about in terms of what these networks are doing. But like USDC and is very, very reputable. What about Paxos? Which are the stable coins that they actually mint?
So BUSD, which is like the main stable coin on Binance, which is the largest centralized crypto exchange, and Paxos was the one who was issuing this token for the most part. But the SEC sent them a letter informing them that there's possibly going to pursue legal action for violating some laws. So Paxos, Coinbase delisted Paxos. A lot of people are figuring out what the fallout from that is, because Paxos has, billions on billions of dollars that they've, minted into the crypto economy. And that's kind of a curveball. Alongside that, the SEC last week ordered Kraken, which is a US-based crypto exchange, to shut down Ethereum staking, which is another service that they offer where people earn staking yields from the Ethereum blockchain by just letting Kraken use their ETH to stake on Ethereum. It's probably more technical than we need to go into, but the fact is the SEC has been taking action over the past 2-3 weeks. There's always been a lack of clarity for the most part in the crypto industry. And the kind of third piece of this is Brian Armstrong released this morning an op-ed, but basically, like, the summarization is he was calling on legislatures and saying it's time for the US to take action and work with companies, not against them, to build a framework that protects users, empowers innovators, and gives American people, the way he put it, is a financial system built for the 21st century. So,
Internet native money. That's what I'm talking about. Brian Armstrong is the CEO of Coinbase, which we've spoken about ad nauseum at this point.
And he's a bald beauty.
Yeah, he's a bald beauty, exactly. He's like not afraid to put on a suit, which is good because most of these dudes are like degens who like look like they love tripping mushrooms all the time. And Brian Armstrong looks like he went to Harvard. because he
It
did.
does.
And
No, I think he went to somewhere in
Princeton.
California, didn't
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm not
he? Yeah.
sure. I'm not sure. I know that. Yeah, he's got an interesting story. Did you watch his documentary? Not the document, like the documentary about him. I don't think he did it, but he was obviously the subject of it. Did you see that?
Yeah, it did. It was cool. I
Was
mean,
it
it
good?
probably wasn't the most exciting thing of all time, but it's cool
Yeah,
for me because I'm a nerd about crypto stuff and seeing
yeah,
like well produced. I think it was on Amazon Prime maybe, but wherever they put it on, like a pretty big stage for them to put a documentary out,
yeah.
basically
It's
about
cool.
him and about the story of Coinbase, which was really cool.
It
Worth
is
a
a cool
watch.
story.
Yeah,
Yeah, Bitcoiner.
but
He's a Bitcoiner.
yeah, he's a big Bitcoiner.
Yeah.
But basically, uh, about crypto regulation, how deep down the rabbit hole have you gone with regulation, or like, how do you feel?
I think, yeah. I mean, honestly, I feel as though it's so opaque. Like, if we were to have this conversation 3 weeks ago, it'd be different. 3 weeks before that, it'd be different. 3 weeks before that, it'd be different because there's a few senators or congressmen and women who are very bullish and pro crypto, but there are not very many. There are a couple. I know that Wyoming is a state in the United States that's extremely pro. They've been implementing legislation that's favorable to the crypto economy, like internet native money, so to speak, or like innovation. They're like very forward thinking toward innovation, and I don't think that they're like trying to stymie things. Whereas like New York, by comparison, it has the bit license, which is very famously a reason. It's a blocker for many centralized exchanges to operate in New York. At the so it's like a balancing act. I don't necessarily think the bit license is inherently bad. It is overly complicated. It seems it's something that I've tried to digest, but I mean, at a high level, it seems as though things are constant. I know that the SEC and then a different, I forget what the other organization is. They're vying to understand who should regulate crypto, and that kind of assumes that it fits within a bucket that already exists. What I think that's inherently wrong. Maybe there should be a new governing body, but then you are asking for the government to take action, which we both know is
Yeah,
very long and boring. And like, will it ever happen? We don't know. Especially when you're
yeah.
looking at all the people, they're all Q-tips. They're all like 80-year-old men, you know. So it's like hard to
Yeah.
imagine that they're focused on this. But
It's funny that
so
blockchains move slowly, the governments move slowly. You think both of them together made in heaven, but yeah, I think part of the problem is it's been very easy for the U.S. to not take action because they like to wait things out, and especially huge changes. It feels like we're not quick to adapt. Where one of the things I watched an interview with Brian today where he was talking about the framework that's being built out in Europe and other countries. He and cities too, like huge metropolitan areas like Singapore, London, like really embracing bringing companies there that are developing this, and we're pretty much falling behind, which I would say
yeah,
is, yeah, we're at risk of being way behind the curve there, which is a
it's
bummer.
interesting. I saw something related to this, but DeFi, I think it was DeFi Llama had published, or maybe no, maybe not. But DeFi Llama is cool. I'm not upset by saying their name on this podcast. But there was a team that had put out a developer. They were doing, so they'd gone through all of the GitHub repos. So GitHub is like it allows for version control of software. So it's a place where people contribute to like open source software or closed source because you can make it private. But what you can do is you can oftentimes, I think it said 1 in 5 people actually geolocate. So they assign themselves a country where they're based. And so they use that data to deduce where these software engineers who are writing Web3 code, so building in Solidity or building in Rust or building and contributing to software products that are on the blockchain or on distributed ledgers. And then they saw over the years from like 2017 up until 2023, a much larger diversity in countries, especially on the continent of Africa, which is, every time I see a chart like that and it says Africa, that's extremely weird because it's made up of like 50 countries. It's like it's very misleading, and I think it's easy to. It just perpetuates this weird thing that it kind of strikes a nerve with me. But nonetheless, like the United States is decreasing very significantly, and the world is increasing very rapidly in general everywhere else. And so they are kind of saying that as well from a development perspective because there is this lack of clarity. I don't know if it's necessarily regulation, but it is seen, I think, in the media. I mean, the government, the media, and the banks are all very close friends. And I don't mean to seem like a conspiracy theorist, but I think that that's pretty well, when you look at where the money goes from
Yeah,
the banks to the politicians, like there's a one-to-one there. And then you look at the headlines, it's all very intertwined. And for better or worse, it is what it is. And
it's
but
almost
ultimately,
like
the
a
banks don't
narrative
want
too.
this.
Yeah, the US has
Why
this
would they? Yeah.
narrative from the top down that's like crypto is for kids. Crypto is where black market drug money.
Yeah,
It feels very tied to the early
very much so. Yeah, it's so true. Especially
And
black market stuff. My dad always talks about that, which is not true. It's very,
yeah,
very little of it is
which
fraud
is
that's
yeah,
happening on chain. Yeah.
it's a narrative that it just sticks for a while until it doesn't. And I think people, I hopefully will realize all the great use cases, see how much money. I mean, the like value locked in the entire crypto space is over $1 trillion right now, which is huge. It's
Yeah.
very, international forward, and it's growing. There's a lot of really cool things you can do with it. And I think Brian Armstrong makes a really good point where he says, we need a financial system built for the 21st century. And even to that point, I wrote here, the SEC has one of the main things, and one of the main ways that they look at cryptocurrency tokens is through the Howey Test. Do you know offhand what the Howey Test is?
No, I don't. I
It
don't.
gets thrown
Please.
around a lot. Oh, I
It does.
wrote it down, so I got it.
Okay, cool. Okay,
But
cool.
a little background: the Howey Test is a legal test that came out of a Supreme Court ruling. Guess what? Guess what year it's from? That we're
Like
using.
the 60s earlier?
46
Oh
is
my
when
gosh. Was it about wheat or something? It's like,
I think it was about whether or not something was a investment contract. So it
okay.
pretty much figures out what should be regulated under the U.S. securities law. So there's four things they look at. First one is, does the transaction involve an investment of money? Is there an expectation of profits from the investment? Uh, the investment is in a common enterprise, and any profits from the efforts of a third party, or any profits come from the efforts of a third party or promoter. So if all four of those elements are present, it's considered an investment contract and is regulated by the SEC, which is,
Interesting.
yeah, four bullet points from the 1940s. So for context, computers weren't even, or weren't
Yeah, dude.
used.
What?
Yeah.
I mean, how big were engines and cars? Like it
And
was a very different world. What was the infrastructure like? Like the great highways of the United States were barely around for 20 years at that point.
I
30
don't think
years.
they had voicemail, man.
I think you're right, dude. I mean, how
Yeah.
can they?
So it's
I
kind of
mean,
crazy. I mean, one of the things I think of about this is when you're investing, everything's taxed really hard. So even you really have to, you're kind of going out on a limb and getting what it feels like overtaxed on a lot of crypto investments. And also there's a lot of worry that, I don't know, if there's not clear regulation and we're using a 1940s law, it feels like we are still extremely early in the space. And it's what makes a lot of people nervous is that the SEC could make a lot of turns and basically try and shut down certain aspects of crypto or like on-chain activity. So it'll be exciting to see what comes out of these next few weeks. With there's a lot more conversations happening in the Capitol, which generally, from what we've seen in the past, people don't speak from a very tech perspective. It's a lot of questions and learning. It feels like for people who are in positions of power,
mhm.
but I feel like the more and more of these we have, hopefully, we're turning a very big ship slowly towards the right direction.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that there's this misconception as well that people who work in this space or are interested in this space are anarchist, which is inherently anti-government, which is I think that's also really silly. Maybe there have to be overlap. I guess that there are anarchists everywhere. There are
Yeah,
anarchists,
there could be one in
at
this room right now. You never know.
there could be one in this room. I'm not an anarchist, if that's what you're alluding to, but nonetheless, I do think that there's these misconceptions that that's this like this large contingency of people who work in this space, which isn't true at all. We really just want to comply, and we don't want to be yeah, we want things that are relevant, I guess is really the point. So I think, yeah, it's a really, really interesting point. I just looked it up. The color television became, I don't know when it like proliferated in the way that the internet did in the mid 90s, but like the first all electric color TV was introduced in 1953. So, so I think
That's
that
crazy.
might need an update, dude.
Yeah, maybe. So hopefully, yeah, that's pretty much all I have on it. I'm sure more things will happen that we can talk about in the future. But as far as regulation goes, yeah, there
So
are,
this meeting though, what about the meeting though? The meeting's going to happen and
it's a
like, are
little,
they,
reading through it, it was a little, politically charged the way they like were creating a subcommittee, which is not that big of a deal. I mean, people are talking about it, but that specific article, I was like, there's a lot of
yeah,
bread on the sandwich and not a lot of meat.
got it. That's a good way to say it. Yeah, that's too bad. Well, other countries are going to do it. So like this tech, no matter what, this technology is not going anywhere, right?
Yeah.
So like if it doesn't happen here and we're slow to move, people are going to move to El Salvador or Portugal. We are just in Portugal not long ago. We were in Barcelona last year. A lot of people there. Lisbon is like this capital. Going to Dubai this month, and that now there was an announcement this week where they were saying that their incentive, they put like $3 billion toward incentivizing people to move there to build or something like that. I only read
And
the
there's
headline. I didn't
zero
pick that up.
taxes on any cryptocurrency transaction, so
That's
it's
crazy.
yeah, it's a
Same with
race
Portugal, actually.
there too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
New York is crazy, dude. It's all capital gains. So it's like, that's why I don't sell any, why would I? It makes no sense. Cool. The thing that I wanted to talk about is open source software. So I think that, so this kind of relates, somebody had sent me an article this week about, a podcast that had sort of a clickbaity title, but it was interesting. 15 minutes. It was published through Gimlet. I think Gimlet was bought by Wall Street Journal. I remember when Gimlet Media was its own entity. I didn't know that they were purchased, but good for them. It's cool. But they were talking about how 5 people manage Bitcoin, and they're like, no one knows this. And this person interviewed was saying like, yeah, I've asked a lot of people and no one knew. It's like, who the hell are you asking, dude? Like, if you ask these two, we're dumb. You're whatever. But he asks us. I know exactly who he's talking about. The core developers. They're core. There's a core team of developers who maintain and act. They don't. In terms of maintenance, there's not a lot of maintenance necessary to have a code base, right? You need to make it such that it's up to date and able to operate within new browsers, or able to operate with new operating systems for mobile phones, and that's little updates, sure. And that's maintenance, I guess you could say. But it's not like software inherently degrades. It's not like it's not like it's like a human body or like a building that erodes because of the weather. It has, if there wasn't a change in the browsers, it would be okay. It would be able to run autonomously. I guess as time elapses, people have more time to study the code that's open source, and then ultimately can try to find vulnerabilities. But there are also teams of people in greater numbers that are doing the same thing, but from the opposite perspective. They're doing it from a white hat hacker perspective, and they're fixing and patching vulnerabilities that they find. They also had in this article, sort of like we're saying that there was a vulnerability, and they didn't tell everybody. And when anybody keeps secrets, it's too centralized. And it's like, well, also you need to keep in mind that if you publish the internet's a very, very large place. You let the people know, they might be able to move quickly and take advantage. We need those people made the decision, whether it's right or wrong, to prioritize a lack of urgency so that they had time to fix something before the shit hit the fan, so to speak. And so I think that also, like, it was just very clickbaity. I thought.
Well,
so
could you go into detail of like what do the core developers do? What is the Bitcoin code base? Like, what does that entail for somebody who doesn't understand the network, I guess?
So Bitcoin itself is a great example of open source software, but like, what is open source software? I think is a really interesting place to start. It's really, really, really simple. It's actually, open source software has changed my life. It changes the way that you think about the internet. At least it's changed the way that I think about the internet since I, for a long time, like 15 years. Something that's really impressive, and it allows for, it's a way of developing software, or really any intellectual property, but mostly software. When you talk about open source, people just assume software most of the time. It's free. That's nice.
Love that.
It can be, yeah, I'm all about it. It can be modified by anybody. So anybody can go in and contribute something. So if you wanted to, you and I could, I'm not a developer, but if I wanted to learn, I think it's C++, you could go in and you could contribute to the Coinbase. I'm sorry. Coinbase is a private company. That's closed source software in juxtaposition to this. But if you want to contribute to the Bitcoin core software, you could. And many people do, and that's a badge of honor for a lot of people, and it's cool. People tell you, I contribute to the code. That's really, really, I think that's something that's really empowering to people. And it doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter where you went to college. If you're contributing solid code, it can be actually added in to the code base itself. There is usually a centralized body, a centralized team of leaders who are usually aligned on core principles like collaboration, transparency, community involvement, decision making, being open and transparent, though. So usually done in public forums, usually done on like literal websites that are forums, in a very transparent way. But ultimately, if you want to contribute, you could just you usually would use something like GitHub, but there are many other different places to repositories for software itself where you can go and contribute. But open source at a high level is really, it allows anyone to view, use, modify, and distribute source code or design. And so it's really inherent to the internet and the way that the internet operates. There are a lot of very private companies, but most of those private companies are using open source software languages to write and build their applications, which is really, really interesting. OpenAI, actually, we had spoken about ChatGPT. OpenAI, by virtue of the name, it alludes to the fact that it is open source. That's no longer the case. This happened in the last year where they went closed source, and that's a huge deal. And I don't think anybody's talking about it, which is a massive, massive problem. But Elon Musk is really interested in it. He's trying to create a competitor now that's properly open sourced again, because that's so powerful. You don't want it in the hands of just a few people who can be corrupted. You want for this sort of building to be done in a public forum. So even though there's this core team that then actually collaborates together and makes the decisions unilaterally, or not unilaterally, because they're doing it in a public way. And so they're not just able to make a decision and change everything, especially with Bitcoin. Bitcoin is unique and it's different from most open source software in that, man, I didn't realize how much I could talk about this. I almost feel like I'm on a ramble. Did you have any questions before?
Yeah. How does somebody so what are these, since this core contributor is no longer on the contributing team, what does it mean to be a contributing member? How do they push updates to it, I guess is the question. Because
so these are volunteers. Yeah.
Don't they have to, there has to be some sort of consensus, right, to actually push a network upgrade?
Yeah, exactly. So these are volunteers that usually are given grants from very big companies or even venture capital firms that really just want for this technology to continue to run or be able to run. And then there are lots of companies that have vested interest in Bitcoin, obviously, who have invested a lot of money and then will contribute to grants or contribute with grants to the core developers. Those core developers, they're usually extremely, especially let's talk about Bitcoin specifically. Those core developers are extremely passionate about Bitcoin. It probably goes without saying. They're also, some of them are really into cryptography. They're very, very technical folks. And they're also, sort of into, at least a couple of them are into anonymity. There's not much you can find on these people other than looking at all of the code that they contribute on GitHub, which is a lot. But they're a pseudonym oftentimes. They're just a name in GitHub. In terms of the ability for them to augment Bitcoin and keep it evolving and up to date with these different browsers, or allow for it to be able, there are block size wars. There are all these different, interesting things that in the history of Bitcoin that have happened, that have been decisions that had to be made as a consensus, as a community. And when the community bifurcates, it means that there's actually a fork in the code, and that's where Bitcoin Cash came in. There are these different forks of Bitcoin that are not nearly as popular as the actual Bitcoin itself, the Bitcoin actual network itself, because decisions are made, not everybody agrees. And when they don't agree, that's okay. They can go, do their own thing on their own network now. But the problem is that you usually are not going to have nearly the same market share that you once did if you stuck with the core. And so those are decisions that can be made, although they probably are made very begrudgingly. But those discussions can be very, 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 very heated, obviously, because this is passionate stuff. But yeah, so there are 5 of them in this article. Then it actually ends up that this week, by happenstance, one of them is actually stepping down because they were very vague about it, but they had sent a tweet. But this person, this is all volunteers. And so since the Bitcoin network is less than 20 years old, and you can see this uptick in software engineers across the entire world. And I worked at a company once that really focused on incubating talent in Nigeria and Kenya, and then Uganda and Rwanda. There are a lot of really interesting and smart people building all over the world now. And I think that we'll see more and more volunteers in the core development team of Bitcoin. If the core development team all somehow stopped today, Bitcoin would still run, because Bitcoin is distributed through a node network. So the only presupposition for Bitcoin actually working is 1, internet, and 2, the fact that people are running nodes. There are about 25,000 nodes around the world. They're not in one room somewhere. So, in the way that like a server for Amazon, it would be very bad operational security for Amazon to have one server farm, and then that place gets on fire, and then all of Amazon goes down. They obviously have redundancies. You could think about this as 25,000 redundancies of Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Some are obviously very insecure because it's some dude plugging it into an outlet in his house and like who knows. But then there are also some that are extremely secure because companies invested hundreds of millions of dollars in Bitcoin and they know that they need to run a few nodes just because they need the security, the peace of mind to, and then there are also countries that are adopting it as a currency or at least as viable, as a value, as an exchange of value medium. And so they also are building infrastructure around the node network itself. So as long as the nodes are running, the only thing you need for nodes to run are people to do it and the internet. As long as those things are happening, Bitcoin is resilient. These 5 people are not able to make unilateral decisions because if they push code, the nodes have to adopt that code. All of the nodes unilaterally.
So the main thing that I don't think people understand in that, at least in that article where they say there's 5 people running and updating, maintaining the Bitcoin network, they don't understand is that they're just pushing code updates that are getting voted on by all of the node operators. And if all those developers got hit by a bus tomorrow, other developers could come on, push updates as well because it's open source software. Doesn't mean that they actually run and maintain it like some sort of board.
Exactly. They're not, it's decentralized through the node network. And the nodes only make the decision. Like I like the way you phrased it. The only thing I'll say is that the decision making that they actually do is just by adopting the new code. They don't have to vote on anything. There's no sort of onus or there's no like governance formally. But if they're going to, these updates don't happen like every single day. Bitcoin is notoriously slow. It's very slow, and as a result, is extremely secure. It's very different from Ethereum. It's very different from a lot of these other networks that are like a bunch of 15-year-old boys who are like, we gotta go fast. Let's build. Let's go. Let's go. It's like Bitcoin's like a bunch of really old cryptography nerds who are like, we need secure money on the internet and we need it now. So we're going to build this really well, because there were years of research done on forums with Satoshi Nakamoto and many others. Hal Finney, these really, really, really brilliant minds that are really into cryptography, but also open source development. And so I think the ethos of it is really about move slowly, deliberately. 5 sounds like a small number, but when you think about the 25,000 node operators, it's a very different story. And it just allows for you to kind of realize the expansiveness and actually how analogous it is to the internet. I think it's amazing. That's one of the things that I find most interesting about it. But open source is very cool just because it's so collaborative. There's no, it's not like a boys club or not like a club where you have to have gone to a certain school and have a certain degree or be able to speak a certain language, or you do have to speak English or at least be able to read English. But there are ways around that too. I think that I think that open source development is like extremely, extremely interesting and kind of an unsung hero of the internet that is something I'm extremely passionate about. And I love, the organization that we, that one of the core organizations that I contribute to, we've open sourced all of our code, which is really, really powerful stuff. It allows for people to build similar dApps with the work that we've done. And that's very common. We're not the first to do that. We won't be the last to do that. That's a part of the ethos of the internet. That's a big reason that Stack Overflow exists. It's a public service to have Stack Overflow. Stack Overflow is the front page of the internet for a lot of people. It's a top 10 traffic website for software engineers. It's a place where you go and ask a simple question about something that you're getting in terms of an error, and it's a place where people then contribute answers for no reason other than points. Those points are worthless, other than just sort of like the pat on the back you feel, the warmth you feel from helping somebody. So it's very much in line with the ethos of the internet, which we've spoken a lot about. But then I was thinking about we should talk more about open source, because I feel as though it's a massive, massive piece of this that is kind of unsung.
Yeah, I think we could harp on it for a long time. I mean, there's some really cool aspects in it. So it differentiates a lot of why we like this industry versus the private company industries where it's all about making a profit and, trying to create a bigger and bigger company or valuation by keeping your secrets and pushing the needle forward. Whereas it feels like a rising tide lifts all ships with open source software, which is really cool.
Ironically, some of the most successful organizations build things in-house and then open source them. So Google did that with their proprietary software language Go. Facebook did that with their proprietary language React. Hedera did that with their code base. They took about 1.5 years to get ahead of the curve. And that's the same thing with these other organizations. They're building and building and building and getting into a place where they're able to provide good enough documentation that's very thorough so people can understand it without having 1,000 questions. And then they then give it as a public good. Even from a legal perspective, there are, open sources. It's under like the MIT license, I think, most of the time. There are other licenses you can use, but it is, yeah. And Ethereum is open source. A lot of these are open source. A lot of these blockchains and DLTs are open source, at least the ones that you want to interact with, because the ones that are closed source means that there are things that you can't double check. We're not developers ourselves, and I'm very infrequently looking through code to like check the vulnerabilities. That's really not my that's not a core competency of mine, but there are a lot of people who do that. And they make a really good living doing it because they expose vulnerabilities and they get paid for them. Oftentimes there are bug bounties. That's how these work. So these organizations will present their code as an open source, and they'll incentivize people. Please look through this. Please, please, please. We don't have enough time. We don't have the manpower to go through all of this all the time. And people do that, and they make a ton of money doing that, which is really cool. I think that it's powerful. It allows for the community to it allows for it to be community owned instead of owned by the single entity. And my initial thought is, well, isn't it less secure because it's open and everybody can see it, including, pirates, so to speak? But in reality, it's more secure because everybody can look at it. And it allows for there to just be constantly checking on things. And like all software, it's never fully secure. It's like a body. We're not going to live eternally. There are little vulnerabilities. That's the only analogy with the body that I'll use, because it doesn't just erode the way that we do. But there are vulnerabilities. There are these little chinks in the armor you can find sometimes, and you just hope that it's found by people who are doing it in a white hat hacker way, not a black hat hacker way. So not trying to exploit it as much as trying to patch it.
Definitely, man. That's great. Love open source. Do you have any hot takes for this week?
I do. I just rewatched our episode from last week in an effort to try to improve. Feel like I did not improve at all, just with a lot of rambling there. But we'll continue to improve. But I was talking about a road trip. I was like, oh yeah, you got to get out of your comfort zone. And like, yeah, road trip's off. I at the last minute I had plans put on my calendar for work, so I have to go to Dubai, and then I have a couple other trips that I have to also go to. So it just didn't make sense to do all this bouncing around. So a little bit disappointed. I think that the hot take is that it's really hard to be flexible, and I think that as I get older, it's like easier for me to not be hard-headed. So I'm a little bit surprised by. It definitely was like I was a little bit taken aback for a few hours there, trying to figure out how I could make this work, and I was like, I just don't think I can. Sometimes you can't. Yeah.
I love.
What about you?
Nowadays, I have a couple that I could of hot take ideas.
Hit me.
And I don't remember what I've done every week now that this is like a week. So I'm going to go with one that I'm pretty sure I haven't said, which is I wear this fitness tracker called Whoop, which is a lot of people wear things that track how active they are, but this one focuses on how recovered you are. So it puts like a very important highlight on how well you sleep and how rested you are. And since I've gotten it, I've like gamified the way I sleep. So I'm like trying to get 100% sleep score as often as possible, which is
wow.
And for me has been a little bit of a game changer because I'm like found a way to make it easier to like enjoy sleeping.
Nice. Yeah. Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, man. So
sleeping's tough, dude. I remember hating sleep as a kid. Now I can't get enough of it.
I just think it's weird that your eyes shut off and then you're just like, you're in snooze mode for 8 to 8 hours pretty much.
It's funny, yeah, dude. It's weird, very counterintuitive.
That's really weird. Awesome. Yeah, that's hot take.
Love that hot take. I don't have a Whoop. I've got a nylon band on my wrist. But shout out to Josiah Soren. Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Yeah, my man. Yeah, Josiah Soren. Yeah, dude. Got NFT. I'm sorry. Lo-Fi Leopards is the name of it. And I was telling Eric before, I love our intro. I think he did a great job. Eric did that. I think it looks great. So there he is, right there, everybody.
Appreciate it. Yeah. If anybody has feedback too, drop it or hit us in the comments if it's on YouTube. Although if you're listening on a podcast app, you can email us at cryptobluehour@gmail.com. Fun fact.
Please do. Absolutely. We read them all the thousands that we get.
All the thousands of it.
Awesome, man. All right, cool. All right, well done. I'll talk to you next week.
All right, talk to you next week.